Grace had always believed that love could change even the coldest of hearts. When she married Collins Adams, she held onto the hope that, with time, he would grow to love and appreciate her. But from the very beginning, their marriage was nothing more than a prison sentence for her. Collins never treated her as his wife, only as a burden he was forced to carry. Every day, she was met with indifference or scorn, his gaze filled with nothing but irritation whenever he looked at her. She tried her best to make the marriage work, taking care of him, ensuring their home was warm and welcoming, but nothing she did was ever enough. To Collins, she was a mistake, an unfortunate accident he couldn't wait to correct. The pain of being unloved, of feeling invisible in her own home, ate away at her, but she stayed, hoping for a miracle that would never come. Collins, on the other hand, saw Grace as nothing but dead weight. He had convinced himself that marrying her was the worst decision he had ever made. She wasn't the kind of wife he had envisioned, she lacked the prestige, the wealth, the status he craved. To him, she was plain, insignificant, and utterly replaceable. He never wasted an opportunity to remind her of this, ensuring she knew just how lucky she was to be married to him. He told her that no other man would ever want her, that she was cursed with bad luck, and that he had done her a favor by marrying her. His words cut through her like a knife, but Grace swallowed the pain, forcing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, if she endured a little longer, he would change. But deep down, she knew she was only lying to herself. Their home, though lavish and beautiful on the outside, was filled with emptiness and despair. The laughter, the warmth, and the love that should have existed between husband and wife were nowhere to be found. Instead, there was silence, cold, suffocating silence that echoed louder than any argument ever could. Grace spent her nights alone, crying quietly into her pillow while Collins stayed out late, doing God knows what. If he did come home, it was only to throw more insults her way before turning his back on her. She felt trapped in a never-ending nightmare, one where her only crime was loving a man who never saw her worth. But she had no idea that this nightmare was only just beginning. Collins took pleasure in belittling Grace, as though her suffering fueled his ego. It was as if he thrived on breaking her spirit, ensuring she remained weak and powerless under his thumb. Every morning, before he left for work, he found a way to throw an insult at her. "Look at you," he scoffed one day, staring at her with undisguised disgust. "You're pathetic. If it weren't for me, you'd be rotting away somewhere, unwanted and alone." His words were like poison, seeping into her bones, making her question her own worth. Grace had never felt so small, so insignificant. She had always believed that marriage was about love, respect, and partnership, but Collins made her feel like she was nothing more than a burden, one he could dispose of at any time. She tried to defend herself once, only for him to laugh in her face. "And what will you do without me, Grace? Who do you think would even look at you?" He sneered, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "No man in his right mind would take you in. You have nothing to offer. You should be thanking me every single day for keeping you." The worst part was that Collins truly believed his words. In his mind, he had saved Grace from a life of loneliness, from a fate worse than being married to him. He expected gratitude, blind obedience, and absolute submission. But all he ever gave in return was cruelty. Grace learned to keep her pain hidden, burying her emotions deep where Collins couldn't see them. But no matter how hard she tried to remain unaffected, his words always found a way to hurt her. She wondered what she had done to deserve such treatment, why the man she had vowed to love had turned into her worst nightmare. And yet, she stayed, out of fear, out of hope, out of the belief that one day, he might change. But with each passing day, it became painfully clear that Collins had no intention of changing. In fact, things were about to get much worse. One by one, Collins ensured that Grace lost everyone who cared about her. At first, it was subtle. He would make excuses whenever her friends wanted to visit, telling her she needed to focus on being a good wife. Then, he began to criticize her family, saying they were leeches who wanted to drag them down. Before she even realized what was happening, she had been completely cut off from everyone who had once been in her life. Her phone calls to her parents became infrequent, her friendships withered away, and soon, the only person she had left was the one who hurt her the most, Collins. He liked it that way. It gave him full control over her, ensuring she had nowhere to turn, no one to run to. Whenever she tried to protest, he would remind her of her so-called bad luck, saying that even her own family was better off without her. "They don't need you, Grace," he would say, shaking his head as if he pitied her. "You're just a burden to them, just like you are to me." And with those words, he crushed the last bit of hope she had left. She stopped trying to reach out, stopped fighting against the isolation he had built around her. Grace had never felt more alone. The house, once filled with warmth and love, felt like a cold, empty prison. Every day, she moved like a ghost, existing but never truly living. She longed for companionship, for someone to see her, to remind her that she was more than what Collins made her out to be. But there was no one left. Or so she thought. Because somewhere out there, beyond the walls of her prison, someone was watching. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment to save her from the nightmare she had been trapped in. And soon, very soon, her life would change in ways she never imagined. Grace had endured years of Collins' mistreatment, holding on to the faint hope that one day, he would change. But deep down, she knew that her love and patience meant nothing to him. The final blow came on a cold evening when Collins returned home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. She had been waiting up for him, worried, hoping he would at least acknowledge her presence. But instead of an explanation, he looked at her with irritation, as though even her concern was an inconvenience. "What are you still doing awake?" he snapped, pulling off his expensive watch. "Go to bed, Grace. You're an eyesore." His words cut through her like a knife, but it was what followed that shattered her completely. "I've been thinking," he continued carelessly, as if he were discussing something trivial. "I don't want this anymore. You and me, it's over." At first, Grace thought she had misheard him. Her heart pounded painfully against her chest as she forced herself to meet his cold gaze. What?" she stammered, unable to process his words. Collins sighed, clearly annoyed by her reaction. "I'm filing for divorce," he said, loosening his tie as he walked past her. "I've had enough of this miserable marriage. Frankly, I don't even know why I married you in the first place." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it, only cruelty. "Oh, that's right, I did you a favor. And now I'm taking that favor away." The room spun around her as she struggled to breathe. She had always feared this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the pain of hearing it from his own lips. Desperation clawed at her chest as she grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "Please, Collins. We can fix this. We can." He ripped his arm from her grasp and glared at her. "There's nothing to fix, Grace. I don't love you. I never did. And I never will." His voice was final, and in that moment, something inside her broke. She had begged him countless times before, to love her, to see her, to treat her like she mattered. But this time, she knew there was nothing left to save. Collins had made his decision. And no amount of pleading would change his heart. The next morning, Grace sat alone in the empty house that had once been her home. The silence was deafening, a cruel reminder of how easily Collins had discarded her. She had no idea where to go or what to do. She had built her life around a man who never wanted her, and now that he was gone, she felt like a shadow of herself. But just as despair threatened to consume her, her phone vibrated on the table. She hesitated before picking it up, surprised to see a familiar name flashing on the screen. Joshua Adams. Joshua had been Collins' business rival for years, but he had always been kind to Grace. Unlike Collins, who barely acknowledged her, Joshua treated her with a respect she had never known. He had seen the way Collins mistreated her, and on more than one occasion, he had warned her to leave. "You deserve better, Grace," he had told her months ago, his voice filled with genuine concern. "You will never change. The longer you stay, the more you'll lose yourself." But back then, she had been too afraid to listen. Now, she wasn't sure she had a choice. With shaking hands, she answered the call. "Grace," Joshua's deep, soothing voice came through the line, immediately calming her frayed nerves. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" The sincerity in his tone made her eyes well up with tears. No one had ever asked her that before. Not Collins. Not anyone. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to speak. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do." There was a pause before Joshua responded, his voice firm. "You don't have to go through this alone. Let me help you." Joshua's words lingered in Grace's mind long after the call ended. Could she really trust him? Could she allow herself to believe that someone genuinely wanted to help her? The fear of being hurt again was suffocating, but so was the thought of continuing to live in the ruins of a marriage that had already crumbled. Collins had made it clear, she was nothing to him. But did that mean she was nothing at all? As the days passed, Joshua continued to check on her, offering her comfort and a listening ear. He never pressured her, never made her feel like a burden. He simply reminded her that she mattered, something Collins had never done. With every conversation, Grace felt something she hadn't in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a world outside of the pain she had endured. Maybe there was a future where she didn't have to beg for love that would never come. But with hope came fear. What if Joshua was like Collins? What if he was only being kind because he pitied her? And even if his intentions were good, did she have the strength to trust again? The war inside her raged on, tearing her between what she had always known and the possibility of something new. Little did she know, the decision would soon be made for her in a way she never expected. Collins wasted no time moving on. Within days of the divorce filing, he paraded his new girlfriend around town, acting as though Grace had never existed. He made sure to flaunt his new relationship in the most public places, knowing word would get back to her. It wasn't enough for him to leave her, he wanted to humiliate her. He wanted to prove that he had moved on, that she was replaceable. But what he didn't anticipate was the reaction of those around him. For the first time, people weren't laughing with him. They were whispering behind his back, questioning his actions. "Did you hear what he did to Grace?" One person murmured at a business gala. "He threw her away like garbage, and now he's flaunting another woman? That's disgusting." Slowly, Collins began to notice the shift. The respect he once commanded was dwindling, replaced with quiet disapproval. Then came the ultimate embarrassment: Joshua, the very man he despised, had begun to take an interest in Grace. And unlike Collins, Joshua treated her like a queen. The rumors spread like wildfire. Collins had discarded Grace like she was nothing, but a billionaire had seen her worth. The realization made his blood boil. Had he made a mistake? Joshua had been watching from the sidelines for years, waiting for the moment Grace would finally break free. He had admired her from afar, always wondering how someone so kind and graceful could endure such cruelty. When he heard about the divorce, he knew this was his chance. He wouldn't let her fall apart. Not this time. He had always known Collins was a fool, but now, the entire world saw it too. The woman he had mistreated was now the center of attention, and Joshua was more than willing to be the man who showed her what real love looked like. But he had to be patient. Grace had been wounded, and wounds like hers didn't heal overnight. As he watched Collins struggle with his growing regret, Joshua couldn't help but smirk. The man who had once looked down on Grace was now realizing the truth: he had thrown away a diamond, and someone else had picked it up. And soon, very soon, he would make sure Collins saw just how much he had lost. Collins had always believed he was in control. He thought he could throw Grace away like a worn-out shoe and move on without consequence. But the moment he saw her stepping into Joshua's world, into the life of luxury, respect, and admiration, something inside him twisted painfully. He had underestimated her. He had convinced himself she was weak, dependent on him, but now she was shining in a way he had never seen before. And worse, she was doing it without him. It started with the whispers. The same people who once envied his wealth and influence were now mocking him behind his back. He let go of a good woman, they murmured. Now look at her, thriving with someone who actually values her. It didn't take long for those whispers to turn into outright scorn. Business associates who once praised him now compared him to Joshua, and he was always coming up short. But the real dagger to his pride came when he saw Grace in person, graceful, confident, and untouchable. The woman who had once begged for his love now looked at him like he was a stranger. Collins couldn't take it anymore. He had to do something. He needed to get Grace back, not because he loved her, but because his pride couldn't handle the humiliation. He convinced himself that if he could just apologize, if he could just make her see that he regretted everything, she would come running back. And so, for the first time in his life, Collins Adams prepared himself to beg. Collins stood outside the grand entrance of the five-star restaurant where Grace and Joshua were dining. His hands were clenched into fists, his heart pounding. Never in his life had he felt so small, so desperate. He had rehearsed his speech over and over. He would tell her he had been wrong, that he had made a terrible mistake, that he wanted to make things right. But when the doors opened and he saw her laughing, truly laughing, beside Joshua, his confidence wavered. She looked happy. Happier than she had ever been with him. Summoning his courage, Collins stepped forward. "Grace," he called out, his voice barely steady. She turned, her expression unreadable as she met his gaze. For a brief second, hope flickered in his chest. But then, she smiled, a soft, knowing smile that wasn't filled with love, but with pity. "Collins," she said, her tone polite but distant. "What are you doing here?" Her calmness unsettled him. He had expected anger, tears, even an argument, but not this cold indifference. I need to talk to you," he stammered, glancing at Joshua, who remained silent, watching him with an unreadable expression. "Please, just a moment alone." But Grace shook her head. "There's nothing left to say, Collins." Her voice was firm, her gaze unwavering. "You made your choice. And so did I." Without another word, she turned and walked away, slipping her hand into Joshua's. Collins watched as they disappeared into the restaurant, the truth hitting him like a crushing wave. He had lost her. And this time, he could never get her back. The courtroom was silent except for the judge's voice finalizing the divorce. Grace sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart aching despite knowing this day was inevitable. Collins, on the other hand, looked indifferent, as if he were merely handling a business transaction rather than ending a marriage. He barely glanced at her as the judge stamped the final papers, severing the last legal tie between them. Grace wanted to cry, but she had no more tears left. The man she had loved had discarded her like an unwanted possession, and now, there was nothing left to fight for. As they stood to leave, Collins didn't even spare her a word. Instead, he straightened his suit, turned on his heel, and strode out as if she had never mattered. Grace watched him go, feeling the weight of the years she had wasted with him. Was this really the man she had begged to stay? The realization hit her like a punch. She had been pleading for love from someone who never even respected her. A deep, overwhelming sense of relief washed over her. The pain was still there, but beneath it, a spark of something new, freedom. Outside the courtroom, the world felt different, lighter. Grace stood on the steps, staring at the sky, unsure of what her next move would be. For the first time in years, she had no one controlling her, no one belittling her. But before she could fully process what was happening, the low hum of an expensive engine caught her attention. She turned toward the street, and there, waiting for her, was a sleek, black luxury car. The door opened, and out stepped Joshua, his expression calm but filled with a quiet determination. Joshua had been waiting for this day. He had promised himself that the moment Grace was free, he would be there, ready to give her the respect and care she had been denied for so long. As he stepped out of the car, his gaze locked onto hers, silently asking if she was ready to step into a new life. Grace hesitated. Could she trust this? Could she trust him? But then she looked back at the courthouse, at the doors where Collins had walked out without a second thought. This was her fresh start. Joshua walked toward her, his movements deliberate, respectful. "It's over," he said softly, as if acknowledging the weight of what she had just endured. He didn't rush her, didn't pressure her. He simply stood there, offering her something Collins never had: choice. Grace felt a lump in her throat. She had spent years being treated as nothing, and now, here was a man treating her as if she were priceless. Slowly, she nodded. Without hesitation, Joshua opened the car door for her. The simple gesture sent a rush of emotions through her. Collins had never done that. He had always treated her as a burden, a nuisance. But now, as she stepped inside, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she was not an afterthought, she was someone who mattered. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back at the courthouse. She didn't need to. Her past was behind her, and for the first time, she was moving towards something better. The interior of the car smelled of fine leather and subtle cologne, a stark contrast to the suffocating spaces Grace had been confined to during her marriage. As she settled into the plush seat, Joshua adjusted the temperature without her needing to ask, another small but significant act of care. He didn't bombard her with questions or force conversation. He simply let her breathe. It was a kindness she wasn't used to. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights blurring past. Then, Joshua finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to decide anything today. I just wanted to be here, to remind you that you deserve better." Grace turned to him, startled by his sincerity. No man had ever said that to her before. Not even her father, who had once warned her that a woman's duty was to endure, no matter how much pain she suffered. But Joshua wasn't asking her to endure. He was offering her something else entirely: dignity. When they arrived at a private restaurant, the staff treated her with a level of respect she had never known. Joshua guided her inside, but not with the possessiveness she had come to expect from men. He didn't control her. He accompanied her. As they sat down, she found herself relaxing for the first time in years. She was still broken, still healing, but for the first time, she felt like she was no longer invisible. Collins had expected to feel relief after the divorce, but instead, there was an unsettling hollowness in his chest. He told himself it was just a habit. Grace had been part of his life for years, even if she had been a constant disappointment. But when he saw the luxury car pulling up to the courthouse, his stomach twisted in a way he couldn't explain. Then, the real shock hit him: Grace, stepping into the car, not like a discarded woman, but like a queen being escorted to her throne. He stood frozen as Joshua opened the door for her. Joshua. A man of wealth, power, and influence. A man who was treating Grace like she was something precious. The realization struck Collins like a blow: she wasn't worthless. She wasn't a burden. She was valuable enough for someone like Joshua to wait for her. Regret curled in his gut, sour and bitter. He had spent years convincing himself that no man would ever want Grace, yet here she was, slipping effortlessly into a world of luxury he had denied her. For the first time, Collins felt something he never expected: jealousy. Not just of Joshua, but of what Grace had become. She had been nothing more than a shadow in his life, someone he had dismissed and degraded. But now, she was shining, and he was the one left in the dark. The feeling unsettled him, and for the first time, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Grace watched the city lights pass by, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. This was the first time in years she wasn't trapped in a life that drained her. Beside her, Joshua remained silent, allowing her the space to process everything. She glanced at him, seeing not just a billionaire, but a man who had been patient with her, who had waited for her to see her own worth. Joshua finally spoke, his voice calm. "You don't have to rush into anything. Just know that you're free now. You get to decide what happens next." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. She had never had the luxury of choice before. Collins had dictated every part of her life, making her feel like she had nowhere else to go. But now, she did. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the car glided through the streets, Grace let herself exhale. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that courthouse. She had stepped out as someone new, someone who was finally reclaiming her life. And for the first time in years, she felt hope. Collins sat alone in his office, staring blankly at the divorce papers that had already been finalized. He had been so certain that getting rid of Grace would bring him peace, but all he felt was a gnawing emptiness that refused to leave. He had expected her to crumble, to beg him one last time, to remain the pitiful woman he had always looked down upon. Instead, she had walked away. No, she had been whisked away, into a life of luxury with a man who clearly valued her more than he ever had. The image of Joshua opening the car door for her replayed in his mind over and over, taunting him. It wasn't just the fact that she had left, it was the way she had left. There was no desperation in her eyes, no clinging to the past, no sign that she was the broken woman he had tried to convince her she was. She had stepped into that luxury car with grace and dignity, as if she had belonged there all along. Collins clenched his fists, his ego bruised. How had he not seen it before? He had wasted years convincing himself that Grace was nothing, only to realize now, too late, that she had been everything. His phone buzzed with a message from one of his friends. "Heard your ex-wife is dating a billionaire now. Man, did you mess up or what?" Collins threw the phone across the desk in frustration. He didn't need reminders of his mistake, he was drowning in them. His mind raced with questions he had no answers to. Was Grace really gone from his life forever? Had she already moved on? The thought sent a wave of unexpected panic through him. For the first time, Collins found himself desperately wishing for something he had thrown away without a second thought. Word spread quickly about Grace's unexpected transformation. It wasn't just that she had left Collins. It was who she had left him for. People whispered in hushed tones about how the woman Collins had once called worthless was now being seen with one of the wealthiest men in the city. Collins' business associates, his friends, even his family, all seemed to have the same question: how could you let her go? The judgment in their voices only fueled his frustration. At first, he tried to ignore it. He told himself that Grace was just being used by Joshua, that she would soon realize she wasn't meant for that kind of life. But the more he tried to convince himself, the less he believed it. He saw pictures of her online, dressed elegantly, looking radiant in ways he had never seen before. Every image of her with Joshua was like a dagger to his pride. She looked happy. Worse, she looked free. Collins' new fiancée, the woman he had left Grace for, noticed his growing distraction. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" she asked one evening, her voice laced with annoyance. Collins scoffed, but he couldn't deny it. He had spent years making Grace believe that no man would ever want her, yet now the entire city was watching her rise, while he was left alone with nothing but regret. Collins could no longer ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. He tried to convince himself that he still had control, that he could win her back if he wanted to. But how? He had humiliated her, discarded her like she was nothing. Would she ever even look at him again? The thought of her slipping further away made his stomach twist in ways he wasn't used to. He had always been the one in control. But now, for the first time in his life, he was the one left chasing. His attempts to reach her started subtly. He called her once, but she didn't pick up. He sent a message, "Can we talk?" But it remained unread. He tried to act unaffected, telling himself that Grace was just being childish, that she would come back to him eventually. But deep down, he knew the truth. She wasn't ignoring him out of spite. She was ignoring him because she no longer cared. Desperation took hold of him in a way he had never known before. He started making excuses to drive past places she used to frequent, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He found himself scrolling through social media late at night, searching for any trace of her. But each time he saw her with Joshua, smiling, glowing, thriving, he felt another piece of himself crack. He had never believed in karma before, but now he was starting to wonder if this was exactly what he deserved. Grace, on the other hand, was stepping into a life she had never dared to imagine for herself. At first, it felt surreal, the luxury, the kindness, the freedom. She had spent so long believing that she was unworthy of happiness that it took time for her to fully embrace it. But Joshua was patient. He didn't rush her. He let her heal at her own pace, giving her the space to rediscover who she was outside of Colin's shadow. She started making choices for herself. She changed her wardrobe, not to impress anyone, but because she finally had the chance to wear what made her feel confident. She started meeting new people, forming friendships that weren't based on obligation but on genuine connection. She learned to laugh again, to smile without fear of being reprimanded. Slowly but surely, she was reclaiming the years she had lost. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of Joshua's penthouse, overlooking the city, she realized something. She no longer thought about Collins. The man who had once dictated every aspect of her life was now nothing more than a distant memory. She had survived him. And, for the first time, she truly believed that she was finally free. Collins couldn't take it anymore. He had to see her. He had to talk to her. He convinced himself that if he could just apologize, if he could just explain himself, maybe she would listen. Maybe he could undo his mistake. But when he finally worked up the courage to call her, she didn't answer. He tried again. And again. Nothing. Frustration burned in his chest. He decided to send a message. "Grace, I made a mistake. Can we meet?" He waited. And waited. Hours passed. His phone remained silent. The realization hit him like a brick. She wasn't ignoring him to hurt him. She was ignoring him because she no longer needed him. Collins slumped back in his chair, staring at the empty screen. He had spent years breaking her down, making her feel unworthy, believing she would never leave. But now she was gone, and he was the one left struggling to move on. For the first time in his life, he understood what true loss felt like. And the worst part? It was entirely his fault. Collins found himself spiraling into a downward spiral he hadn't anticipated. At first, he tried to maintain the facade that everything was fine, that his decision to divorce Grace had been the right one. But as the weeks passed, it became clearer that his life was unraveling in ways he couldn't control. His business, once thriving, began to falter. His colleagues were starting to doubt his abilities. The deals he'd once easily secured now seemed just out of reach, and every failure stung more than the last. He had always been the man in control, the one with the power. But now, with Grace gone and his life in disarray, he felt small and powerless. His personal life was no better. His fiancée, the one he had rushed into a relationship with after Grace, began to pull away. She had hoped that their engagement would be a fresh start for both of them, but it quickly became apparent that Collins was emotionally unavailable, consumed by regret and the desire to win Grace back. He would try to push her for affection, but she was no longer willing to be in his orbit. She had seen the man he truly was, and it wasn't someone she could love. Collins felt the sting of her distance, realizing too late that he had taken everything for granted. Even his own friends began to distance themselves, sensing that something was wrong. The stories about Grace and Joshua's blossoming relationship were all over the city, and they couldn't help but gossip, some even expressing disbelief that Collins had ever let her go. His pride, which had once been so impenetrable, now felt like a heavy weight dragging him down. Collins had lost control of everything he had once cherished. All he could think about was how he had let Grace slip away, and how she was thriving without him while he was left alone to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. As Collins floundered, Grace's new life under Joshua's guidance was only gaining momentum. Joshua had become more than just a comforting presence in her life. He was her mentor, her guide, and most importantly, her friend. Joshua saw potential in Grace that no one, least of all Collins, had ever noticed. He introduced her to new opportunities, pushing her to start a business of her own. Grace had always had a knack for entrepreneurship, but she had been held back by the constant emotional weight of her past. With Joshua's support, she was finally able to realize her dreams. They traveled together, exploring new ventures, and slowly, Grace began to build a network of successful, influential individuals who admired her not for her looks or past suffering, but for her brilliant mind and sharp business acumen. She was no longer the quiet, subdued woman Collins had manipulated. She had become a force to be reckoned with. Joshua's belief in her was unwavering, and with every step forward, Grace felt more empowered, more alive. She knew she was deserving of the success that was finally coming her way, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward Joshua. But as her confidence grew, Grace found herself facing a new challenge: how to navigate this new life without looking back. She had lived for so long in the shadows of Collins' cruelty, always second-guessing herself. Now, in the light of her newfound success, she struggled with the idea of what it meant to be truly free. Joshua, however, never let her doubt herself. He continued to push her, and slowly, Grace began to embrace her new reality. She was no longer defined by the past. She was becoming her own woman, and it was a feeling she had never experienced before. As Collins watched Grace thrive, a dark thought began to form in his mind, a way to reclaim some of the power he had lost. He wasn't going to let her move on so easily. He had been humiliated in front of his peers, and his life was falling apart. But there was one thing he could still control: his public image. Collins knew he couldn't win Grace back with apologies alone, not after everything he had put her through. But what if he publicly apologized? What if he took the high road, expressed regret, and showed the world he had made a mistake? His plan was simple. Collins would stand before his colleagues and friends, admit to his failures, and show that he was the better man for letting Grace go. He would apologize for the way he had treated her and tell everyone that he had learned from his mistakes. It was a move that would redeem him in the eyes of others, and maybe, just maybe, it would spark some kind of reaction from Grace. He couldn't just let her slip away into the arms of Joshua without doing something to reclaim his position. But as Collins began to plan his public apology, something inside him gnawed at him. Was it truly for Grace? Or was this just another way to regain control? He was fooling himself if he thought an apology would undo the pain he had caused her. He had abandoned her when she needed him most, and now he wanted to win back her love for his own ego. He had always been a man of pride and manipulation, and while he might have learned the hard way that Grace was irreplaceable, he couldn't help but wonder if this was just another desperate attempt to salvage what was left of his shattered reputation. Grace, meanwhile, had no intention of ever acknowledging Collins again. Her decision to move on had not been made lightly, but it was final. The more she saw of him trying to manipulate his way back into her life, the more resolute she became in her decision. She had found something within herself that Collins could never take away: her sense of self-worth. She didn't need his approval, nor did she need him to apologize for her to feel validated. The truth was, she had always been worthy of love and respect, and Collins' refusal to see that only proved how little he had ever understood her. She didn't need to respond to his public apology or to his private attempts at reconciliation. His actions only confirmed what she had always known: he had never truly loved her. He had loved the idea of controlling her, of keeping her in a place where she felt small and insignificant. Now that she had stepped into the light, he was struggling to accept that she no longer fit the mold he had crafted for her. Grace had no desire to play his games. She had learned to find peace in her own strength, and that was a power Collins would never understand. Her silence was her strength. It was a powerful reminder to herself, and to Collins, that she no longer needed him. She was thriving in a world that valued her for who she truly was, not for the version he had tried to create. She was free, and no amount of apologies or public gestures could change that. Collins' attempts to regain her attention only solidified her belief that he was the past, and she was moving forward, leaving him behind where he belonged. Collins' desperation deepened. His public apology had failed to gain the traction he had hoped for, and Grace remained unmoved. It was as though she had completely erased him from her life. Furious and humiliated, he concocted a new plan, one that would force Grace to notice him. If he couldn't win her back with words, he would try to sabotage Joshua. He knew that in Grace's new world, Joshua was the most influential figure in her life. If he could make Joshua look bad, maybe he could drive a wedge between them. Collins began to dig into Joshua's past, searching for any possible scandal or mistake he could use to discredit him. He made anonymous calls to journalists, dropping hints about a potential financial scandal involving one of Joshua's investments. He spread rumors, hoping to shake the foundation of the perfect life Joshua had built for Grace. His mind was clouded with rage, and he couldn't stop himself from taking these desperate, underhanded measures. If he couldn't have Grace, then no one else could. But as the rumors began to spread, something unexpected happened. Grace confronted Collins. She didn't need to raise her voice or make threats. Her gaze alone was enough to make him feel smaller than ever before. "If you think you can bring me down by dragging Joshua into this, you're sorely mistaken," she said quietly, her voice calm and composed. "Your actions only make me more certain that I made the right choice by leaving you. I deserve better, and I have better." The finality in her words left Collins speechless, and for the first time, he realized the extent of his own downfall. Collins' plan to sabotage Joshua took on a life of its own. What began as simple gossip and whispered rumors soon escalated into a full-blown attack on Joshua's character. He hired private investigators to dig deeper into Joshua's financial dealings, hoping to unearth anything that could cast a shadow over his image. Collins was relentless in his pursuit, convinced that by damaging Joshua's reputation, he could tear apart the bond that had so quickly formed between him and Grace. His obsession with her was clouding his judgment, and every step he took toward this self-destructive path felt like a desperate grasp for control he knew he had lost. But the deeper Collins dug, the more he revealed about his own failings. The more he sought to expose Joshua, the more people began to see him for what he truly was, a man consumed by envy and regret. The whispers that started about Joshua soon turned into loud discussions about Collins' desperation. His actions were turning him into a pariah in his own circle. While Collins spent sleepless nights chasing shadows, Grace remained unfazed. She wasn't just moving on with her life. She was flourishing in ways that Collins had never imagined. The more he attempted to tear her down, the more her resilience shone through. His actions were nothing but a reflection of his bitterness, while Grace continued to rise above it all, her confidence and grace drawing even more admiration from those around her. One evening, after an especially intense confrontation with the journalist he had paid to leak damaging information, Collins found himself staring at the phone in his hand. His attempts to drag Joshua down were failing miserably. Not only were the rumors being disproven, but Joshua had remained untouched. Grace, on the other hand, was thriving, and Collins could feel the enormity of his mistake settling heavily on his shoulders. It wasn't just that he had failed to keep Grace in his life. It was that in trying to destroy someone else, he had destroyed his own reputation and chances at redemption. It was clear to him now, his jealousy, his pride, his bitterness had led him to this point. He had forfeited everything valuable to him in the name of revenge, and for what? The confrontation came when Collins, tired and ragged from weeks of plotting and scheming, showed up uninvited at one of Grace's business events. Joshua had been by her side throughout the evening, making sure Grace was comfortable and surrounded by supportive individuals. Collins, in his bitter desperation, arrived unexpectedly, determined to make his presence known. He cut through the crowd, his eyes fixated on Grace as he approached her. He was no longer the man who had been in control of everything. Now, he was nothing but a broken shell of the arrogant, controlling husband he had once been. "Grace," Collins said, his voice betraying the weariness of someone who had been on a long, losing battle. "We need to talk." His tone was insistent, demanding. But Grace, who had long since grown tired of his manipulations, simply stood tall. She had learned to read the desperation in his voice, and she was no longer fooled by it. Joshua stepped forward, a protective barrier between Grace and Collins. "Collins," Joshua said firmly, his voice calm but laced with authority, "it's clear that you don't understand what no means. This is not your place anymore. You've made your choices." The tension in the room was palpable as Grace finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with finality. "I don't need you to apologize, Collins. You've already shown me who you are. And I'm done." There was no anger in her words, only the quiet power of someone who had finally let go of the chains that had once bound her. Collins' face flushed with frustration, but it was not the rage of someone who still had control. It was the helplessness of a man who had realized too late that he had no place in Grace's life anymore. "Grace," he pleaded, his voice cracking slightly, "please, I need your forgiveness." But Grace wasn't swayed. "Forgiveness is something you can't earn from me, Collins. You lost that when you decided I wasn't worth fighting for." In the days following their confrontation, Collins became consumed by a gnawing emptiness. He could no longer deny it, he had lost her. He had lost the woman he had once dismissed as nothing more than a burden. Now, she was thriving in ways he could never have predicted, and he couldn't stop himself from feeling the sharp sting of regret. He had been blinded by his own arrogance and had allowed his pride to ruin the one thing he had ever had that truly mattered. But still, there was a small part of him that believed if he tried just one more time, Grace might come back. It was that lingering hope that pushed him to reach out again. This time, Collins didn't send a message or make a call. He showed up at Grace's office, unannounced. He had shed his usual arrogance and walked into her office as if he was a man begging for mercy. His heart raced as he stood in front of her, this time without the shield of his pride. "Grace," he began, his voice trembling, "I know I've hurt you. I know I can never undo what I've done, but I need to tell you how sorry I am. I was a fool. I took you for granted, and now, I've lost everything." His words came slowly, but they were filled with the weight of years of regret. Grace listened, her eyes unwavering as she stared at him. She had heard it all before, the excuses, the false promises, and the broken apologies. Collins had never truly cared for her. He had only cared about his own ego. This time, his words rang hollow. "Collins, your apologies mean nothing to me now," Grace said quietly. "You had your chance to show me who you really were, and I saw it. But you never saw me for who I truly am. I've moved on, and I'm never looking back." Collins' heart shattered, but there was no anger in Grace's eyes, only the peaceful finality of someone who had healed. Collins left Grace's office that day feeling defeated in a way he had never experienced before. All his attempts to win her back had failed miserably. His pride had led him to this moment of complete emptiness. Grace, on the other hand, was at peace. She had lived through the worst of her marriage to Collins, and she had emerged stronger for it. Every day since she left him had been a step toward healing, a step toward reclaiming herself. She was no longer the woman who had craved his approval. She was the woman who had built her own future, one filled with love, respect, and endless possibilities. She never once wavered in her decision to leave him behind. Every time Collins tried to re-enter her life, It only reminded her of the strength she had gained by walking away. She had known for a long time that he was incapable of loving her the way she deserved. His love had been toxic, suffocating, and ultimately, it had been a lie. Grace had learned to love herself, something Collins had never allowed her to do. Now, with Joshua by her side, she was ready for the next chapter of her life, one where she could finally be the person she had always been meant to be. As for Collins, he had finally come to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. It wasn't just that he had lost Grace, he had lost himself in his need to control and dominate. He had underestimated her strength and, in doing so, had lost the one person who could have made him a better man. Now, all he had left was regret, a bitter pill he could never swallow. The life he had once envisioned for himself had slipped through his fingers, and he was left with nothing but the memory of what could have been. But Grace? She had moved on, and she would never look back. After his failed attempts to win Grace back, Collins was left in a state of profound despair. His career had suffered, his personal life had disintegrated, and his reputation was tarnished beyond repair. He couldn't escape the suffocating weight of his own guilt. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace, her strength, her beauty, her resilience. And he realized too late that she had been the best thing that had ever happened to him. He had dismissed her, belittled her, and destroyed their marriage, and now he was paying the price. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find peace. The guilt gnawed at him, eating away at his soul. He tried to drown his sorrows in alcohol, but it only deepened the loneliness. He attempted to rekindle his relationship with his fiancée, but it was clear to both of them that it wasn't meant to be. She had never been the one he truly loved. She had simply been a placeholder for the emptiness he felt inside. Collins realized that the more he clung to the past, the more he lost his grip on the future. Grace had been his anchor, and now she was gone, forever beyond his reach. In his isolation, Collins was forced to confront the harsh reality of his life. He had destroyed everything that mattered, all for the sake of his own ego. The regret was all-consuming, and he knew that no amount of time or apologies would ever undo the damage he had caused. He had lost Grace, and in doing so, he had lost the person he could have become. The life he had dreamed of was slipping away, and all he had left was the knowledge that he had made a choice that could never be undone. Grace's life continued to flourish, and with every passing day, she grew more confident in herself. She had been through the hardest part of her journey, surviving Collins' emotional abuse, and had come out stronger on the other side. The support and love she received from Joshua were just the icing on the cake, but it was her own inner strength that had allowed her to move on. She had built herself into the woman she was today, and nothing, not even Collins, could take that away from her. As for Collins, Grace no longer felt the slightest hint of resentment or anger. She had long forgiven him, not for his sake, but for her own peace of mind. She realized that the best revenge was living well, and she was doing just that. Every success, every new venture, and every new relationship she formed was a testament to the strength she had found within herself. Collins was a distant memory now, a chapter she had closed and moved beyond. Grace's future was bright. She had everything she needed to continue on her path: respect, love, and a sense of purpose that Collins could never provide. And as she looked toward the horizon, she knew one thing for sure: she would never look back. Collins had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover who she truly was, without his suffocating presence in her life. And in doing so, she had finally found herself. Grace stood before the mirror, inspecting herself with a quiet pride she hadn't known for years. The woman staring back at her was confident, poised, and strong, a stark contrast to the timid, broken wife she had once been. In the months following her divorce from Collins, she had undergone a transformation. No longer trapped by the confines of a loveless marriage, Grace had blossomed into a woman who knew her worth. She was no longer someone who needed validation from a man, especially not someone who had once torn her down. Each day she lived was a testament to her strength, to the resilience she had discovered in the face of adversity. As Grace ventured deeper into her career, her success was undeniable. She spoke with conviction at business meetings, her ideas well respected and eagerly received. She had created a reputation for herself, one that was built on integrity and intelligence. Her social circle, too, had changed. Gone were the friends who had once condoned Colin's treatment of her, replaced by people who admired her for who she truly was. They supported her dreams, celebrated her victories, and encouraged her growth. And in the midst of it all, Joshua was there, ever the constant presence, offering encouragement and gentle love. Grace no longer hesitated to accept his affection because she knew she was worthy of it. This new version of Grace inspired everyone she met. Women came to her for advice, seeking guidance on how to escape toxic relationships and rediscover their strength. Grace became a symbol of hope and empowerment, showing others that it was never too late to rebuild a life. She spoke at conferences, shared her story, and used her platform to raise awareness about domestic abuse and the importance of self-love. Her transformation wasn't just physical. It was internal. Grace had learned to forgive herself for the years she had spent in silence, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her life. From the shadows, Collins watched as Grace's life unfolded in ways he could never have imagined. She was thriving, glowing in a way that made him feel small and insignificant. He had thought that by casting her aside, he would reclaim his dominance and move on with his life. But what he had failed to see was the power that lay within Grace, the strength he had tried so desperately to diminish. Now, every time he saw her name in the news or heard about one of her accomplishments, it felt like a slap in the face. He had destroyed the one good thing in his life, and there was no turning back. His life, on the other hand, was spiraling into chaos. His business was floundering, his relationships were fractured, and his reputation had been irreparably damaged. The more he tried to salvage what was left of his life, the more it slipped through his fingers. He had spent so much time focusing on destroying Joshua and Grace, that he had neglected to care for his own well-being. Collins had no true friends left, no one who genuinely cared for him. His desperation had led him to this point, a man alone in his regret, looking back at the life he had destroyed. Every day, Collins woke up to the reality that Grace was gone, and he had no one but himself to blame. He had once been a man who had everything, a wife who loved him, a successful career, and a family that respected him. But all of that had slipped away because of his own arrogance and inability to recognize the value of what he had. Now, as he watched Grace build a life he could never touch, the weight of his mistakes grew unbearable. He had destroyed his marriage, but more than that, he had destroyed the possibility of ever finding true happiness again. Joshua had never been more certain of his feelings for Grace. Over the months they had spent together, his admiration had blossomed into a deep love. He had always seen her for who she truly was, a remarkable, strong, and beautiful woman, and he wanted nothing more than to share his life with her. The way she had transformed, not just in her career, but in her heart, had filled him with awe. She was no longer the woman who had been held back by the shackles of her past. She was free, vibrant, and full of potential. And Joshua knew he wanted to be there to support her every step of the way. One evening, after a quiet dinner at his estate, Joshua led Grace to a terrace that overlooked the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the scene, and the air was crisp and fresh. He took her hand, his heart racing with anticipation. "Grace," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I've loved you for a long time, but more than that, I've admired you. You've shown me the true meaning of strength and resilience, and I want to spend the rest of my life supporting you, loving you, and building a future together." He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me, Grace? Will you let me show you every day how much you are loved and cherished?" Grace stood still for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The proposal was everything she had dreamed of, not the grand gestures of someone trying to buy her affection, but a quiet, heartfelt promise of a future filled with love and respect. She had been given the space to grow, to heal, and to become the woman she was meant to be. And now, standing before her, was a man who saw her not as a possession to be claimed, but as a partner to be cherished. With tears in her eyes, Grace smiled and nodded. "Yes, Joshua," she whispered. "Yes." Collins was not finished. His mind had been consumed by thoughts of Grace since the moment she had left him, and no matter how much time passed, he couldn't shake the image of her thriving without him. He had tried to move on, to find another woman to fill the void Grace had left in his heart, but nothing worked. Every relationship felt like a pale imitation of what he had once had. He knew he couldn't undo the damage he had caused, but he had to try. He had to find a way to make things right, even if it was just for his own peace of mind. He arranged to meet Grace one last time, hoping to plead his case. This time, he wasn't demanding forgiveness or expecting her to take him back. He simply wanted to say the words he had never said before, the ones that had been buried under layers of pride and ego. As he sat across from her, he felt vulnerable in a way he never had before. "Grace," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I've hurt you in ways that can never be undone. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry for everything I put you through. I was wrong. I can't change the past, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, even if it's just so I can stop living with this guilt." Grace listened quietly, her face impassive. She had heard these words before, but they had never meant anything to her. Collins had never truly cared for her, and this apology felt like nothing more than an attempt to ease his own conscience. "Collins," she said softly, "you will never get forgiveness from me. Not for what you did. I've moved on from the woman you wanted me to be. You destroyed our marriage because of your own insecurity, and I will never forgive you for that." Collins sat in stunned silence as Grace's words hit him like a tidal wave. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that by apologizing, he could reopen the door to redemption. But Grace had made it clear, there was no coming back from what he had done. The finality in her voice, the calm strength that emanated from her as she spoke, left no room for doubt. She would never forgive him. And that was something he would have to live with for the rest of his life. For the first time, Collins truly understood the depth of his mistakes. It wasn't just the loss of Grace that pained him. It was the realization that he had never seen her for who she truly was. He had dismissed her, belittled her, and broken her spirit. And now that she had rebuilt herself, stronger than ever, he was left on the outside, watching as she flourished without him. His actions had led to this moment of irreparable loss. He had let his pride destroy the only chance he had ever had at true happiness. As he walked away from their meeting, Collins couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of regret that clung to him. He had thought he could control everything, his marriage, his career, his life. But he had underestimated the power of grace, of true love, and of self-worth. He had lost it all, and now, there was nothing left for him but the haunting reality of what could have been. Collins sank into a chair, his mind consumed by the realization that he had no one left. The life he had envisioned, one filled with success, power, and admiration, had crumbled before his eyes. He had let his arrogance drive away the one person who had truly loved him, and now he was left with nothing but the weight of his actions. Grace had moved on, found happiness in a way that he could never have given her, and with Joshua by her side, she was everything he had never been able to be. Collins had destroyed that future. In his isolation, Collins found himself questioning everything. The power he had once so fiercely sought seemed meaningless now. He had alienated everyone who could have helped him, including his own family. His business was failing, and the people who had once looked up to him now saw him as a cautionary tale. He was a man who had everything and thrown it all away, and now, he would have to live with the consequences for the rest of his life. There would be no redemption, no second chance. He had burned every bridge he had ever had. Grace, on the other hand, continued to rise. She had everything now, the love, the respect, and the peace. Grace stood in front of a grand mirror in her penthouse, watching the reflection of a woman who had come so far. Tonight was the night. A celebration not only of her success but of the freedom she had reclaimed. Every guest in the room admired her strength, her poise, and the way she carried herself. They marveled at how she had risen from the ashes of a toxic marriage to become a beacon of empowerment for others. The past no longer held any sway over her. She was no longer the woman who had begged for a chance, the one who had suffered in silence, hoping for things to get better. Now, Grace was the architect of her own happiness. Joshua stood by her side, his presence a constant reminder of the love and respect she deserved. Their relationship was no longer just about companionship. It was about mutual growth, trust, and respect. As the night unfolded, Grace found herself smiling with ease, enjoying the life she had built. For the first time in years, she wasn't haunted by the ghosts of her past. Colin's cruelty, his abandonment, had been the catalyst for her transformation, but it no longer had a hold on her. She had learned the true meaning of self-worth, and with Joshua beside her, she was free. The celebration was a reflection of everything she had become, a woman who knew her value and embraced it fully. She shared stories with her friends, laughed until her cheeks ached, and allowed herself to bask in the happiness she had earned. No longer weighed down by self-doubt or fear, Grace was finally at peace. She had let go of the pain of her past and allowed herself to celebrate the person she had become. This was her moment. A moment of triumph and freedom, where she had emerged victorious from the ashes of her past, stronger and more beautiful than ever before. As the weeks passed, Grace and Joshua's bond deepened. They weren't just partners in the traditional sense. They were each other's biggest supporters, guiding each other toward greatness. Joshua had long been an admirer of Grace, but now, he was in awe of the woman she had become. He had watched her rebuild herself, piece by piece, and he knew that the future they could have together would be nothing short of extraordinary. Grace had dreams that extended far beyond what Collins had ever envisioned for her, and Joshua was determined to help her achieve them. They began to travel the world together, experiencing new cultures and building connections that would further enhance their careers. Grace's work in the business world continued to thrive, but now, she had the ability to expand it into global ventures. Together, they made a powerful team, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. Grace had always been independent, but with Joshua by her side, she felt an unparalleled sense of support and love. They were partners in every sense of the word, their relationship a beautiful dance of respect, admiration, and love. Joshua proposed again, this time without any need for hesitation or doubt. On a private yacht overlooking the calm ocean, with the sound of the waves gently crashing against the hull, he knelt before Grace. The world seemed to pause for a moment, and in that silence, he spoke from his heart. Grace, you've taught me the true meaning of love. Not just the romantic kind, but the kind that empowers, lifts, and grows. Will you marry me and continue this journey with me? I can't imagine a future without you by my side. Grace smiled, her heart full of happiness and peace. Yes, she said, knowing in that moment that her life had come full circle. The woman she was now was everything she had ever needed to be. Collins had once been a man who thrived on control and arrogance. But now, as he sat alone in his office, his mind spinning with thoughts of his past, he realized how empty his life had become. The calls from his former business associates had stopped, and the silence in his home was deafening. His attempts to rebuild his empire had failed, and he had no one to blame but himself. He had chased away the only woman who had ever truly cared for him, and now he was left with nothing. Grace had moved on, and in her place, there was only regret. It was painful to watch from afar as Grace flourished, her success growing exponentially while his own life descended into chaos. His loneliness was a constant companion, and his heart ached with the knowledge that it was his own actions that had led to this isolation. He tried to fill the void with distractions, new business ventures, meaningless relationships, but nothing could replace the one thing he had lost, Grace's love and the life they could have had. Every time he saw a news story about her achievements or heard about her latest accomplishments, it felt like a cruel reminder of what he had lost. He had let her slip away, and there was no going back. Collins began to fade into obscurity, his name now a distant memory in the business world. He could no longer summon the energy to care about his once immense success or his broken reputation. The man he had been was gone, replaced by a shadow of regret. He had lived his life with arrogance, thinking he could control everything and everyone, but in the end, he had lost it all. Grace had thrived without him, proving that no one was irreplaceable. Collins was left with the bitter truth: his own self-destructive decisions had led to his downfall, and he was too far gone to ever find redemption. Collins' days blurred together in a haze of regret and bitterness. He had tried everything to win Grace back, but each attempt only reminded him of how far he had fallen. The lessons he had ignored during his marriage to her now seemed so glaringly obvious, but it was too late to change anything. Grace had found peace, happiness, and love, while Collins was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered existence. His wealth, his status, all the things he had once held dear now felt empty. He had lived his life for the wrong reasons, chasing power and control at the expense of what truly mattered. As he wandered the halls of his once grand home, now devoid of warmth or life, he could hear echoes of the past, the laughter he had once shared with Grace, the moments they had spent together before his cruelty had taken over. Those memories no longer brought him comfort. Instead, they served as a constant reminder of his failures. He had wanted to break Grace, to keep her beneath him, but in the end, it was he who had been broken. The lesson, however, was a hard one, learned too late to change anything. Grace, on the other hand, had found everything she needed. Her future was bright, filled with love, success, and happiness. She had left the pain of her past behind, emerging stronger and more resilient. As she walked into her future with Joshua, there was no room for regret, only hope and excitement for the life ahead. The story of Grace and Collins had ended, but for Grace, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with love, freedom, and the fulfillment of her dreams.